With the announcement of the upcoming Zelda spin-off Hyrule Warrior's Age of Calamity, a game set during the cataclysmic and devastating events of the Great Calamity, where the Kingdom of Hyrule was devastated completely by the raging malice of Calamity Ganon 100 years before the events of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the entire internet has exploded into a sea of excitement and anticipation for this new title, and with good reason. Being able to experience the events of the Great Calamity firsthand is a massive deal, as before the announcement, we had never even considered the possibility of having a game set during this era, as it would have been impossible to create a traditional Zelda game based on those events, considering there would be no dungeons to explore, nor a need to explore them, no main antagonist that would threaten you throughout the game until his surprise attack at the end, and no real way to actually defeat Ganon, resulting in a tragic ending, something that has never happened before in any Zelda game. After the release of the spin-off game Hyrule Warriors, some consider the idea of having a Hyrule Warriors game set during the Great Calamity, as this type of game would allow the developers to tell the story in depth and have huge battles the likes of which Zelda has never seen before, yet none of us actually expected it to actually happen. The reveal of Age of Calamity has sparked an interesting concept, an idea that I think could potentially happen in the future. All the Hyrule Warrior games which will retell the unseen conflicts taking place between the other games of the series. Throughout Hyrule's history, there have been numerous wars that have been mentioned in the prologues and cutscenes of several games, but never actually seen nor experienced firsthand. From the invasion of the demons that poured forth from the underworld into the land protected by goddess Hylia, in search of the power of the Triforce entrusted to her by the old gods, to a war to seal the gateway of the Dark World and imprison the king of demons, Ganon, within the corrupted sacred realm. Each of these wars could be made into their own respective game, diving deep into the backstory of many of our favorite Zelda games, experiencing these events like never before, seeing these eras and conflicts in a whole new light. There are 8 non-major conflicts that have taken place during Zelda's history, 9 if we count the Great Calamity, which we will be able to experience in the upcoming prequel to Breath of the Wild. Joined by many fellow Zelda YouTubers, we will go over each of these conflicts of Hyrule and discuss how they could be made into their own unique games.
Hyrule Warrior's Age of Hylia would be the game set in the era of Goddess Hylia, thousands of years before the events of Skyward Sword, when the world was ruled by the White Goddess tasked with the care and protection of the almighty relic of the 3 golden goddesses, the Triforce. During this time, the goddess Hylia lived in harmony alongside the humans and the other races of the surface within the 3 provinces of the land. The expansive forests of Faron, inhabited by the plant-like Kikwi and the aquatic Perella of Lake Floria, the volcanic ranges of Eldon, populated by the treasure-hunting Magma, and the deserted wastes of Nayru. Once a lush green landscape teeming with life and filled to the brim with technological wonders of a once advanced civilization, now scattered with the remains of the countless ancient robots who lay lifeless on the dry dunes of the desert. The game would start shortly before the day of the demonic invasion, with a cinematic showing us the ancient world at peace. We would witness Goddess Hylia in her full glory, watching over the many races of the surface, playing her goddess harp and being attended to by her Sheikah servants. Among these Sheikah servants we would see Impa, the young Sheikah warrior we would meet in Skyward Sword, who we know was alive during the time of Goddess Hylia herself, as when Link first crosses the Gate of Time to reach the past, Impa states,
"You stand in the past, ages before your own time. Here the goddess Hylia has only just sealed away demise, and little time has passed since the goddess sent the outcropping of rock into the sky that would one day become Skyloft."
The Nayru region would be the main hub of advanced technology in the world, the technology possibly even spreading towards the other corners of the land of Hylia. We could potentially be introduced to the possible protagonist of the game itself, Hylia's first chosen hero, the very first incarnation of the hero whose existence was alluded to by Zelda in Skyward Sword, to be the hero Goddess Hylia gave her sailcloth to in the distant past, an exchange we would be able to witness firsthand. The gameplay itself would start following the demonic invasion, where an intense earthquake would shake the earth, forming a large fissure from which legions of demons would pour into the world, led by their ruthless leader, Demise, whose eyes burned with the desire to possess the golden relic with the intent of ruling the surface with an iron fist. An initial battle would take place here, where we would take control of Goddess Hylia, Impa, and possibly Hylia's chosen hero, which would not end the war due to the surprise attack of the demonic forces and Hylia not having a weapon to combat her opponents. Several battles would be spread across the 3 provinces, fighting against the Demon King Demise, his loyal servant Girahim, and their demonic forces, for the protection of the Triforce and fate of the world itself. Girahim and Demise could be playable characters in a mission similar to how you took control of Ganondorf, Zant, and Girahim themselves in the original Hyrule Warriors, unleashing their fury onto the forces of Goddess Hylia. We would witness firsthand the forging of the Goddess Sword, possibly by the hands of the original 6 sages.
Zelda here, just cutting in to let you know that I made a theory quite recently going over how the sages are likely responsible for the forging of the Goddess Sword, ordered by Goddess Hylia herself to craft a weapon for her to wield against Demise himself. The many origins of the Goddess Sword could finally be set in stone and clear out the contradictions of the Master Sword's creation throughout the entire series. So make sure to check out that theory after this video if you haven't already. Back to the video.
We could have a set of levels where the sages would be playable on the search for the materials needed to forge the blade, possibly Master Ore, which was used in Lorule to upgrade the Master Sword, with Hyrule's own Master Ores theorized to be the metals that were used to forge the Goddess Sword in the long-distant past, pretty much explaining why Lorule had no Master Sword of their own, and Hyrule possessed no Master Ores themselves. The game could introduce us to new heroes of each race of the surface, serving a purpose similar to the champions of Breath of the Wild, who would combat hordes of demons to defend their homes from the incoming attacks of Demise and his forces, later joining Goddess Hylia in her final confrontation against the Demon King, which would result in his imprisonment. These heroes, who we could call Hylia's champions, could even be the ones we see in the prologue of Skyward Sword, which could actually represent these heroes who fought alongside Hylia, as well as the races themselves. An optional battle, similar to those in Hyrule Warriors with Linkle, could be within the Nayru Sea, more specifically the Nayru Sandship, which, during a massive storm, was attacked by ruthless pirates led by the robot LD-002G Skirvo, who took the Sandship's crew hostage and threw its captain, Skipper, overboard. Skirvo himself could be playable during the section, with Skipper being the boss of this level, the level ending with Skirvo taking over the ship and defeating Skipper. The 3 guardian dragons of the regions, Faron, Eldin, and Nayru, could also be playable during this game, leading an army of Perella, Mogma, and ancient robots respectively within their regions. At some point in the game, we would escort the surviving humans to the Temple of Hylia, protecting them from incoming waves of demons, and witness the ascension of the humans atop the outcropping of land that would come to be known as Skyloft, sent skyward by the goddess in order to protect the remaining humans and the Triforce from Demise, the latter being placed within secret chambers inside the Silent Realm, whose entrances were hidden within the Skykeep. The final battle would be the decisive confrontation between Hylia, now wielding the Goddess Sword, and Demise, which would result in the Demon King's imprisonment within the grounds of the Temple of Hylia, bound to his prison with the Sealing Spike. The game could end with a long cinematic where Hylia would begin her preparations to renounce her divine form to one day be able to use the mystical power of the Triforce, limited to be used exclusively by mortals by decree of the Golden Goddesses. Hylia would first create Phi, the spirit within the Goddess Sword, whose task would be to assist the hero on his mission to defeat Demise upon his inevitable return, knowing full well that the seal would not last forever. Then we would see Hylia place her memories within the Skyview and Earth Springs and entrust each of the 3 dragon deities of the surface, Faron, Eldin, and Nayru, and the spirit of the skies, Levias, with a fragment of the Song of the Hero, a melody which would reveal the way to the resting place of the Triforce, sending the Goddess Harp and the Goddess Sword to the Isle of the Goddess before renouncing her divine form in order to reincarnate into the form of a mortal. The game could end with a flash forward that could directly tie with Skyward Sword, where we would see a young Link playing with a young Zelda in the floaty islands of Skyloft, or possibly Link meeting his Crimson Loftwing as a small child.
Hyrule Warriors Age of Chaos would be the game set thousands of years after Skyward Sword in the era known as the Era of Chaos. This game would play out the events of the War for the Triforce and the Interloper War, a massive conflict that sparked for the possession of the mystical power of the Triforce, hidden within the Sacred Realm. The game would begin with the world at peace, the Kingdom of Hyrule having not yet been established. Rumors of the Triforce and its powers to make any wish a reality would begin to spread to all corners of the land, catching the attention of the many greedy and power-hungry individuals across the land. It is unclear who you would play as during this time, as there's no indication that a hero was present during these events, but the ancient sages, who would include the Sage of Light Rauru, would definitely be among the roster of characters. After a series of battles between the inhabitants of the land of Hylia, a group of magic-wielding interlopers will join the struggle to obtain the Triforce within the Sacred Realm. Using the Fused Shadow, a dark artifact of their making, the interlopers would defeat everyone who stands in their way. The interlopers could be playable during this section, making their way towards the Golden Land and defeating all of their opponents. To combat the unstoppable threat of the interlopers, the goddesses themselves would intervene, ordering the light spirits Farron, Eldon, and Nayru to deal with these interlopers. The light spirits could be playable during this section, or we could continue playing as the interlopers, as they attempted to stand their ground against the messengers of the gods. The result of this battle would end in favor of the light spirits, who would take the Fused Shadow from the interlopers. The interlopers would scatter across the land, forcing the goddesses to chase after them, engaging in a series of battles until they were subdued and brought to justice. The game would end with the cinematic of the Fused Shadow being split into 4 fragments and the interlopers being banished to the Twilight Realm through the Mirror of Twilight alongside a fragment of the Fused Shadow. The remaining 3 pieces being sealed within the Forest Temple, Goron Mines, and the Lakebed Temple. The light spirits would then hand the Mirror of Twilight to the 6 sages, the protectors of Hyrule, to watch over it and be in charge of sending criminals to the netherworld of Twilight.
Hyrule Warrior's Age of Bounding would be the game set before the events of the Minish Cap, at the start of the Force Era. The Kingdom of Hyrule was at the beginning of its lifetime, having just been founded years prior during the Era of Prosperity. During this time, the kingdom was ruled by King Gustaf, the earliest known king in Hyrule's history. Gustaf had close ties with the people of the Wind Tribe, considering them close friends long before their departure to the clouds above Hyrule, and always sought to maintain the peace of the kingdom, even countless ages following his death. One fateful day, demons launched an invasion throughout the many regions of the kingdom, burning fields, destroying villages, and murdering without mercy. There would be various battles to try and fend these attacks, but ultimately, they would be in vain, as the monsters would overwhelm the Hyrulean forces, threatening to end the kingdom. Just when hope seemed lost, a young Hylian appeared to lead the campaign against the increasing threat of monsters. It was then that tiny beings known as the Minish descended from the sky in their hour of need with 2 gifts. A purple-hilted sword which would come to be known as the Picori Blade, and a golden power known as the Light Force. The Picori Blade was given to the young Hylian clad in green, who would wield the powerful weapon to face off against the increasing threat of the invading monsters. This man would naturally be the main protagonist of the game, the one we would come to know as the hero of men in the tales told in the Minish Cap. The Sacred Light Force was then given to the princess at the time, Zelda, who would also be playable alongside the hero of men. The sacred power of the Minish would be passed down through her bloodline to her future descendants in order to keep it safe. With the gift of the Minish at hand, the hero of men would lead a counter-assault against the demonic forces. One by one, the monsters would be defeated across the many regions of the kingdom, and sealed away within a large chest, using the blade as a key to the monster's prison. Not much else is known of this war except what is told to us in the prologue of Minish Cap, so it is hard to imagine of what other characters could be playable. Perhaps Gorons would protect their home in Mount Cornell from the incoming monsters and later join the Hylian army in their final struggle to seal the monsters away, with the Goron chief or hero being playable during these scenarios. While the Hyrulean army fights against the human-sized monsters, it could be possible to have the tiny Minish join the battles, where we would play as Minish soldiers in order to fight against the small demons to protect their own Minish lands and aid the Hyrulean army. These Minish levels could even be secondary scenarios where we can experience the battles in a whole new light, from the miniature perspective of the Minish. The Wind Tribe, who were still living in the swamps of the Tabantha region south of Castor Wilds, could also aid in the battle with the use of their Armos Knights, powerful mechanical soldiers built for them by the tiny Minish to protect their wind fortress. We could even see the Wind Tribe's ascent to the sky during this game, an event mentioned throughout Minish Cap where the Wind Tribe raised their home, the Palace of Winds, to live in the cloud tops forever.
Hyrule Warriors Age of Conflict will be the game that will take place shortly before the events of Ocarina of Time, focusing on the conflict known as the Hyrulean Civil War, a conflict mentioned only once throughout the entire series by the Deku Tree Sprout in Ocarina of Time. After traversing the depths of the Forest Temple and ridding it of its curse, freeing Saria from the grasp of Phantom Ganon and awakening her as the Sage of Forests, Link will be transported to the glade of the Deku Tree before the rotting remains of the deceased Forest Guardian. It is here that the Deku Tree Sprout, the descendant of the Great Deku Tree, jumped out from the ground to greet the hero of time. The Deku Tree Sprout will reveal to the hero his true origin, explaining that he was never a Kokiri, but a Hylian left in the care of the Deku Tree when he was just a baby. In the midst of the Hyrulean Civil War, a young Hylian woman fled to the Kokiri forest, carrying her newborn child in her arms. Gravely wounded, the mother handed her son to the Great Deku Tree in order to keep him safe, succumbing to her wounds and passing away shortly after. Sensing the boy would play a major role in Hyrule's future, the Forest Guardian raised the boy as a Kokiri to keep him safe. Not much else is known about this conflict in Hyrule's history, the exact reason for the start of this war being a complete mystery, but we can speculate what the reason of the conflict could be. We know that before and during the war, the races of Hyrule, those being Hylians, Sheikah, Gorons, Sora, Gerudo, and Kokiri, each governed by their respective chiefs and monarchs, existed separately, without a central government that ruled over them equally. The Gorons of the volcanic region of Death Mountain were ruled by their chief, Darunia, a strong Goron warrior destined to become the Sage of Fire. The Gorons were generally peaceful and minded their own business, although they were also known to be quite territorial and stubborn. The likeliness of the Gorons starting the war is quite low, as they wouldn't have a reason to start a conflict as large as this. The Sora of the Nayru region were ruled by King Sora the Bon 16, with their central hub being in Sora's domain, at the source of Hyrule's waters. They tended to be quite peaceful, and are known to be long-time allies of the royal family, their allegiance possibly dating back even before the start of the Hyrulean Civil War, so the Sora definitely didn't start the war. The Kokiri of the forests were guarded by the Great Deku Tree, prohibited from leaving the forest for their own protection, and thus they were not involved in the war. The Hylians were ruled by the royal family of Hyrule, who resided within Hyrule Castle. Their main settlement was Hyrule Castletown, although other villages were likely present across the kingdom. The Hylians usually tried to keep peace, not disrupt it, so we can rule them out as the ones who started the conflicts. The Hylians had close ties with another race, the Shadow Folk known as the Sheikah, the servants and protectors of the royal family since ancient times, who carried out the darkest deeds of the royal family from the shadows. Hyrule Encyclopedia states that in eras of war, they are essentially agents of the royal family, handling all manner of duties, from combat to intelligence gathering. No matter how dark or perilous the task, they will do what is necessary to keep the kingdom from harm. The Sheikah served as spies, assassins, executioners, and torturers for the royal family, and being their sole purpose to serve the royal family exclusively, they wouldn't start the war. You could argue that the Sheikah could betray the royal family similar to the Yiga clan in Breath of the Wild, but there is no indication that something like that happened during this time. The Gerudo of the Western Deserts were ruled both by their king, Ganondorf, the sole male Gerudo born once every 100 years destined to rule by Gerudo tradition, who by this time is likely a child or a young man, and his two surrogate mothers, the witches Kouma and Kotake, also known as Twin Rova when merged into a single form. The Gerudo are the most likely candidates to have started a war for obvious reasons, but let's elaborate. The Gerudo were a race of thieves, often looked down upon by the people of Hyrule. They lived in a harsh climate, with scorching days and freezing nights, no fertile soil, and hardly any water. Ganondorf tells us in Wind Waker that the Gerudo wanted a better life, a life which could improve in the lush green land of Hyrule. However, these lands were already occupied by Hylians and other races, leaving no room for the desert-dwelling woman. The only possible way for the Gerudo to claim land outside of the desert would be through conquest. Conquest that would lead to war. A war which wouldn't be hard for the Gerudo to start, as their isolation from Hyrule and envy for their better lives grew resentment and hatred towards the Hylians, and thus, it is logical to assume that they would be the ones to declare war. The confrontation between the Hylians and the Gerudo is clear, but what about the other races? As stated before, the Kokiri wouldn't be involved in the conflict, as the Great Decree prohibited their exit from the forest. The Sora, having strong ties with the royal family, would aid them immediately in their battle. The involvement of the Gorons is tricky to determine. We know that they ended the war in good terms with the Hylians, the king of Hyrule even becoming Darunia's sworn brother. They definitely didn't side with the Gerudo, as they refused to give Ganondorf the spiritual stone they guarded, resulting in the Gerudo king blocking the entrance to the Dongo's cavern, the Gorons' main source of food. It is not known if the Gorons remained neutral during the war, keeping to themselves and defending Death Mountain from incoming attacks, or joined the Hylians in the struggle, but they most likely had to deal with the Gerudo in one way or another. As for the Sheikah, they would remain loyal to the royal family, carrying out the darkest deeds of the war by orders of the king, spying, capturing, torturing, and assassinating their enemies from the shadows to ensure the royal family's victory in this war. The war would last several years, likely ending shortly before the events of Ocarina of Time with the defeat of the Gerudo. To ensure the peace of Hyrule, the king would unify all the races of the land under the banner of the royal family of Hyrule, establishing the royal family as the central powerhouse of the kingdom. The Gerudo would then be forced to swear their allegiance to the king, as seen at the beginning of Ocarina of Time, when Ganondorf kneeled before the Hyrulean monarch, despite actually not really being loyal to him in the slightest. As there isn't much information regarding this important conflict, which would set up the events of Ocarina of Time, a Hyrule Warriors game exploring this conflict would perfectly fill this empty gap in Hyrule's history. Of the possible characters that would be playable during this game, there are some likely candidates: Impa, the leader of the Sheikah, and Princess Zelda's caretaker, who would lead the Sheikah into battle and, by orders of the royal family, torture their enemies within the sinister Shadow Temple to reveal information of their opposing side in order to gain an advantage. Another possible character would be Darunia, the Goron chief, who would lead his Gorons into battle and protect his beloved home within Death Mountain. Another character would be the young King Sora the Bond 16 in his prime, leading an army of Sora to protect their domain and aid their Hyrulean allies. Rauru, the Sage of Light, the creator of the Temple of Time, and the sage tasked with the protection of the Triforce within the Sacred Realm, could also join the war to aid in the struggle against the opposing force. A young Ganondorf could also be playable during this game, leading his people into battle. The witch's twin Rova, either as one entity or two individual characters, would watch over their surrogate son Ganondorf and also leading the war. And lastly, of all these playable characters, we could play as Link's parents, with Link's father being a knight of Hyrule serving the king during the war, and later protecting his wife as she fled with her baby in her arms from the fires of war into the forests of Hyrule.
Hyrule Warriors: Age of Imprisoning would be the game that takes place before the events of A Link to the Past, focusing on the conflict known as the Imprisoning War. The game could begin at the decisive battle between Link and Ganondorf on the tallest tower of Ganon's castle, in a cinematic never before seen where we would witness the fall of the Hero of Time at the hands of the King of Evil, which would change Hyrule's future forever. Following the death of the Hero of Time, Ganondorf would extract the Triforce pieces from Link and Zelda, using the Sacred Relic's full power to transform himself into Ganon, the Demon King. As a desperate last resort, Zelda and the Six Sages sealed Ganon and the complete Triforce within the Sacred Realm, now transformed into the Dark World due to Ganon's malice. The game would have a time jump in which Hyrule would see an era of peace following the banishment of Ganon. During this time, rumors of the Triforce said to be within the Sacred Realm, and its power to grant any wish to the one who touched it, spread across the land, causing many greedy travelers to head into the corrupted Sacred Realm, never to be seen again. These travelers were turned into demons who would increase the numbers of Ganon's growing army, an army which Ganon would soon unleash onto Hyrule with the intention of becoming the ruler of the worlds of light and darkness. Ganon's army would first attack the heart of the kingdom, Hyrule Castle, where the first battle of the game would take place. During this time, the Seven Sages urgently sought out a hero throughout all of Hyrule who would be worthy of wielding the Master Sword that rested within the Grove of the Lost Woods, once wielded by the Hero of Time against Ganon. But their search was in vain. The search itself could be divided into 3 groups of 2, each group searching in a different region of Hyrule to no avail. To combat the increasing conflict, the King of Hyrule would order the 6 sages to seal the entrance to the Sacred Realm, instructing the Knights of Hyrule, brave soldiers who protected the royal family, to defend them from Ganon's demonic army. The final battle of the game would consist of defending the 7 sages as they seal the gateway of the Sacred Realm. You would control the Knights of Hyrule and battle against waves of demons, or the sages as they fought their way through the monsters to seal the entrance of the Dark World. If one of the 7 sages, spread across the battlefield, falls while attempting to seal the gateway, the mission has failed and the battle is lost. Halfway through the process, Ganon would join the battle, serving as the final boss of the game and a major threat to the sages. During this battle, many courageous knights of Hyrule would fall to Ganon's army, nearly being wiped out in the process. However, as the knights near their end, with almost all of them being wiped out, the sages would successfully seal the Sacred Realm, imprisoning Ganon within the Dark World and ending the invasion. Although the battle was won, the kingdom had suffered great casualties and was left in a state of impoverishment due to the cost of the many resources used in the battle. A prologue mission could be unlocked at a certain point in the story, where we would take control of Ganondorf as he led the incursion into the Sacred Realm. Ganondorf would fight against his band of thieves, as they made their way deeper and deeper into the heart of the Sacred Realm, the Temple of Light, in order to obtain the Triforce. The boss of this mission would be Rauru, the Sage of Light himself, the protector of the Triforce, as he tries everything in his power to prevent Ganondorf from reaching the Triforce.
Hyrule Warriors Age of Deluge would be the game that would take place after the events of Ocarina of Time, during the adult timeline, prior to the events of The Wind Waker. This is the time when Ganondorf, after being defeated by the Hero of Time and sealed within the corrupted Sacred Realm by the sages, broke free from his seal and returned to Hyrule in a red wrath. Ganon would lay siege to Hyrule, destroying everything in his wake. The people of Hyrule sought out the Hero of Time, hoping he would return to save them, but he never came. It's safe to assume that the awakened 6 sages seen during the events of Ocarina of Time, the very same ones who originally sealed Ganon within the Dark World, would battle against him, but ultimately would be defeated by the evil king. Ganondorf had his eyes set on 2 particular targets this time around. The 2 sages responsible for granting the Master Sword its power to repel evil with their prayers. The Sage of Earth, Laruto, and the Sage of Wind, Fado. Ganon and his forces would storm the Earth and Wind temples of Hyrule, facing off against Laruto and Fado. This section would likely be played by Ganondorf himself, similar to the Ganondorf levels in the original Hyrule Warriors. Upon the sage's death, the Master Sword lost its sacred light. As a response to this, the king of Hyrule at the time, Daphnis no Hansen Hyrule, attempted to stop Ganondorf himself, using his magic as his primary form of attack. However, his efforts were insufficient to stop the wielder of the Triforce of Power, and thus, the king of Hyrule was defeated in battle. As Ganon's army infiltrated Hyrule Castle, the people of Hyrule turned to the gods to help them against this massive threat. During these desperate moments, the Master Sword was placed within the basement of Hyrule Castle, which froze Ganondorf's army and sealed away the Demon King's magic, which in turn would seal Ganondorf beneath the waves as well. The survivors of Hyrule were then instructed by the gods themselves to seek shelter within the mountaintops of the land, the peaks becoming islands as the entire kingdom was submerged beneath the waves. The races of Hyrule faced drastic changes in their ways of life because of this flood. The surviving Hylians would have no choice but to rebuild their civilization in the new world, changing their way of life forever. Of these Hylians, Princess Zelda would be one of them, whose descendants would find a way of life among the waves as pirates. The Gorons of Death Mountain likely drowned, the survivors who managed to reach the mountain peaks becoming simple merchants in the oceanic world. The Zora, being unable to live in the ethereal waters of the gods, were transformed into the bird-like Rito by the spirit of the skies, Valu, a crimson dragon who likely took part in the massive war against Ganondorf. The Kokiri of the forests were turned into the Koroks in order to be able to fly across the islands of the Great Sea. As for the Sheikah and the Gerudo, it is not clear what happened to them. They could have either drowned or sought shelter in the mountaintops like the rest of Hyrule's inhabitants. The possible characters that could be playable during this game are the following. The 7 Sages, which include Darunia, Saria, Naboru, Impa, Ruto, Rauru, and a descendant of the Princess Zelda we saw in Ocarina of Time, who, like we discussed earlier, likely took part in trying to stop Ganon's rampage. The Sages of Earth and Wind, Laruto and Fado, who could have joined the other 7 sages in their initial battle, later retreating to their temples to give power to the Master Sword as they waited for the Hero of Time to return, which he never did. We could also play as Ganondorf himself, destroying wave after wave of soldiers of Hyrule. And finally, King Daphnis Nohansen Hyrule, the King of Hyrule himself, who was also playable in the original Hyrule Warriors. The king is known to have directly faced Ganondorf upon his return, so he would definitely be playable during several battles.
Hyrule Warriors Age of Spirits would cover the events of the war between the Spirits of Good and the Demon King Maladus in the distant history of the land which would become New Hyrule. The exact time these events took place is uncertain. All we know of the placement of these events is that they were long before the time of Spirit Tracks, said to be a tale of the first settlers of the land, indicating this event was ancient. The tale of this event states that Maladus rose to power before attacking the land. Perhaps an indication that this was a demon who replaced Demise before the rise of Ganon. This game's placement possibly being directly after Skyward Sword and before Ocarina of Time, likely before Minish Cap and before the previously mentioned Age of Chaos. In this game, we would see the land of the Spirits of Good before the establishment of the Kingdom of New Hyrule. During this time, the Land of Spirits was watched over by the Spirits of Good, benevolent spirits worshipped by the people of the land who lived peacefully on the 4 regions of the world. The Gorons resided in the northeastern fiery mountaintops, the Anuki on the snow-covered fields of the northwest, and the humans spread mostly throughout the southern regions of the land. The beginning cinematic of this game would show these 4 lands in harmony, its people living in peace with the Spirits of Good watching over them. Then, the ground would shake as hordes of demons rushed towards the peaceful people of the land, led by the raging Demon King Maladus, with the sole intent of destroying everything in their path. There would be several battles where humans and other races tried to fend off the demonic attacks, ultimately failing to stop them, forcing the Spirits of Good to battle Maladus himself. With the Spirits of Good, and likely the servants of the spirits, the Locomo, at their side, the races of the world would fight back the demons, as the Spirits of Good battled Maladus on the war that seemed to last forever. Wielding the Locomo sword, a blade filled with sacred energy, and the Bow of Light, we would play as the Spirits of Good in the final battle against Maladus and his forces, managing to subdue the Demon King, although not being able to completely destroy him, as their power would be greatly depleted during the battle. With their remaining power, the spirits would bury the Demon King's spirit below the ground, and build shackles known as the Spirit Tracks to imprison him, chains which extended to the far reaches of the land, charged by sacred energy from the 4 force gems of each of the 4 temples of the world, an energy which flowed towards the tower the Spirits of Good erected at the heart of the land, which acted as a lock to his prison. The game would end with the spirits entrusting the land to the care of the Locomos before departing to the heavens, gifting them the divine weapons they used in the battle, the Locomo sword and the bow of light, and entrusting them with the care of the spirit train and maintaining the tracks that bound the Demon King. A possible last scene could be a flash forward to where we see Tetra and the pirates, accompanied by the hero of Winds, Link, reach the land of spirits, meeting with the Locomo Anjean entrusted with the care and protection of the Tower of Spirits. We could also see Linebeck reach the land which would become New Hyrule, who we know arrived there as his grandson, Linebeck III, lives in New Hyrule, with Linebeck's actual tomb being found not far from his home. Among the roster of characters, those who come to mind would be the Spirits of Good, being controlled to fight against Maladus himself. The Locomos, those being Anjean, Gage, Steam, Carbon, Embos and Rail, whom we meet during the events of Spirit Tracks. Maladus, in a similar sense to how we took control of Ganon in Hyrule Warriors, perhaps in a beastly form, although I do think his original form would be more humanoid in shape. Possible characters that could appear could be Byrne, Anjean's Locomo apprentice before his betrayal of his own kind, although we don't know when he actually became Anjean's apprentice, so him showing up could likely not happen. And Cole, Maladus' servant who must have been alive during the time Maladus was free, since he was ceaselessly trying to resurrect his master, in a similar fashion to how Girahim sought to free the Demon King from his own prison, although Cole's appearance is also up to debate.
Hyrule Warriors Age of Technology will be the last of the games we will cover, and the third most recent game in the timeline, preceding the events of both The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and the upcoming Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. This game will be set during the events of the ancient attack of Calamity Ganon, 10,000 years before the great calamity we will soon witness firsthand. Upon meeting Impa in Kakariko village, the Sheikah Elder will recount the legend of 10,000 years ago, the event which would set up the inevitable catastrophe of the most recent calamity. It is said that 10,000 years ago, Hyrule was a highly advanced civilization, thanks to the technological prowess of the Sheikah, who built incredible machinery that ushered Hyrule into an era of prosperity, where monsters posed no threat to the people of the land. Having faced Calamity Ganon countless times throughout Hyrule's history, the kingdom deemed it wise to use this technology to ensure the safety of the land were Calamity Ganon to return. They built 4 mechanical wonders that came to be known as the Divine Beasts, gigantic armored titans in the shape of animals, each named after a past sage of the land. Divine Beast Baruta, shaped after an elephant, named after the Sage of Water, the Sora Princess Ruto. Divine Beast Barudania, shaped after a gecko, named after the Sage of Fire, the Goron Chief Darunia. Divine Beast Barnaboris, shaped after a camel, named after the Sage of Spirit, the Gerudo Warrior Naburu. And Divine Beast Barmedo, shaped after an eagle, named after the Sage of Earth, the Rito Youth Medley. Each Divine Beast was piloted by 4 individuals who came to be known as champions, chosen from each of the 4 races of the land. The Sheikah also constructed an army of autonomous weapons that came to be known as Guardians, tasked with aiding a hero chosen by the sword that sealed the darkness, and a princess who possessed the sacred sealing power passed down through the woman of the royal family. With this mechanical army, the plan to defeat Ganon upon his inevitable return was set into motion. Similar to Age of Calamity, this game would show the events unfold until the day that Calamity Ganon appeared in Hyrule once again. We would take control of both the hero at the time and the Princess of Hyrule to combat against Calamity Ganon alongside an army of guardians. We would also take control of the ancient champions, fighting alongside the hero and the princess, and perhaps even taking control of the 4 divine beasts, charging them into battle and blasting your foes into oblivion. For all we know, we may actually be able to do this in Age of Calamity itself. These ancient champions could wear the helmets we receive when scanning the amiibos of the 4 most recent champions, the descriptions of each one saying that they are treasures gifted to the ones who controlled the divine beasts. Other possible playable characters could be the Sheikah monks, the servants of the goddess Hylia, tasked with testing the future hero within their respective shrines. I doubt we will play as all 120 monks, but perhaps we will be able to play as a select few, such as Oman Ao, Jabaij, Owadine, and Kenamut, the 4 monks found within the Great Plateau, who would each grant and test the hero on the unique runes of the Sheikah Slate, and perhaps Monk Mascosia himself, the Sheikah monk enshrined within the final trial below the Shrine of Resurrection itself, serving as the final boss of the Champions Ballad DLC. Talog Naeg, another monk found within the shrine in Kakariko village, could also be playable, as Olkin, a Sheikah villager, reveals more information regarding this particular monk.
Long ago, a wise master known simply as a swordsman was enshrined, right here in this village, no less. It is said that if you overcome this trial, you will master the secret art of defense. However, no one knows exactly what this trial entails.
Perhaps we could see Talon Naeg in action, seeing firsthand this monk's legendary sword skills that are remembered even 10,000 years later. Another possible character could be an early ancestor of Impa, sharing the same name of the wise elder of Kakariko, serving as the ancient princess's protector, like in eras long past, being a formidable warrior to any foe that may come her way. The art of these games could use the same style as Breath of the Wild, setting the cel-shaded art as the official art style of the Zelda series. Perhaps the before mentioned Age of Spirits, being tied directly to Spirit Tracks, could have the style of the Wind Waker, with Age of Deluge and Age of Bounding sharing this style, although the rest seem like they could work nicely in the Breath of the Wild style. The use of this style could also set the way for remakes of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword in the style of Breath of the Wild, in an open world setting which would allow the games to be experienced like never before, but that is a topic for another time. And that were all the ideas of the possible Hyrule Warrior games that could cover the many unseen conflicts of Hyrule. I would like to give a huge thank you to NintendoBlackCrisis, Tyler Townsend, Hyrule Gamer, Nayru, Hylian Luke and SuperZeldaGirl for collaborating in this video. A link to their respective channels will be in the description and the pinned comment. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos like this one. Also, consider following me on Twitter and Instagram at Zelda Lore 86. This has been Zelda Lore, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.